Thank you very much. Thanks, Eric. Actually, Eric, I think you were the first librarian I met when I started this job, so it's always a pleasure to work with you and to be here. And I'm feeling very honoured to be surrounded by such library greatness, to be sharing the stage with Lily and Rolf and Gerald, but also to be here with you guys. So thank you very much for having me. So I work for Public Libraries 2020. Can I just see a show of hands? Who has heard of us? Oh, that makes me smile. That's fantastic. Well, I'll just do a quick intro for the few of you who are not so familiar with us. So we're based in Brussels. We're, as Eric was saying, a European public library advocacy project. So our kind of two goals are, on the one hand, working with the library sector. We don't have members, but we have what we like to call our advocacy lab, and really kind of developing tools for librarians to be able to advocate for themselves. So obviously we work very closely with IBLIDA and IFLA to achieve those goals. But the other goal for us, and the reason why we're based in Brussels, is really about European advocacy. So raising awareness of the work that Europe's 65,000 public libraries are doing, and often really kind of challenging some outdated perceptions that European policymakers might have of libraries, and kind of showing them how libraries have the potential to contribute to the priorities that they're setting at the European level. Our project was launched 2014, so 4 years ago, by a very generous grant from the Gates Foundation, and we're actually managed by the Reading and Writing Foundation of the Netherlands, so just up the road. So we have very strong links there to literacy and reading and writing, but for us, our focus is very much on Europe and very much on public libraries. And this is a little bit of a turning point for our project, because we're reaching the end of our funding cycle with Gates. So we're really at a point where we're thinking about how we can capitalise on all the relationships we've built in Brussels and really maintain some momentum over the next few years. So in the next 20 minutes, I'll try and stick to 20 minutes. I'm going to just take you through 5 things that we've learned about library advocacy in Europe. And although, like I've said, our focus is on the EU, on European policymakers, I think there are definitely some parallels that can be drawn between European level advocacy and then advocacy on a national and on a local level. Before I dive in, I do just want to take a little pause to revisit the definition of advocacy. The definition that we use, I think, is very simple. It's influencing policy for an outcome that benefits a certain sector, so in this case, the library sector. For us, advocacy has 2 very clear goals, but which clearly overlap. So on the one hand, political influence and visibility, relationships with policymakers, but also money, generating funding opportunities where we can. So far, our focus has really been on the political influence and visibility, especially starting out. I think that's where you have to start when you're creating a presence, especially in a place like Brussels that has tens of thousands of other lobbyists all trying to make their voice heard. But now we're also really looking to the future about how we can generate some funding opportunities for libraries. And I'll explain later in my presentation why now is the right time to be doing that. So let's dive in. 5 things we've learned about European library advocacy. I've used this word a couple of times already, but number 1 is it's all about relationships. With our political advocacy, of course, you have to have some kind of a political awareness of, timing, elections. In Brussels, it's good to know which MEP, so member of European Parliament, is in what committee, where they have influence, where their interests lie, in order for us to be able to identify the fruitful entry points for us. But really what we've learned is what it comes down to is relationships. So on the screen here, I think some of you know our director, Ilona, on the left. Back when she had pink hair, that was very cool. And on the right is a member of European Parliament, a British member of European Parliament, Catherine Styler, who we actually met at an event here, I think, actually, because she's a real library lover. She has a genuine personal interest in libraries. And we saw that and we thought, this is this is a real opportunity. So over the past few years, we've built a very personal relationship with her and with her assistants, her office in Brussels. And it actually got to the point, I think it was last year, Catherine was, they call it a rapporteur. She was writing a very influential report on the copyright, the European copyright reform that's happening at the moment in Brussels. And she actually came and approached us and asked us for our input and if she could use our wording when it's usually we're fighting for it to be the other way around and knocking on MEPs' doors. So having that relationship is incredibly valuable. And I think that's also important in general terms, not to be caught on the back foot, so that when you really need something from a policymaker, when you're calling their office, there's already a kind of a trust there and a knowledge and a relationship. So that's number one. Number two, librarians make excellent ambassadors. I think when we've spoken to librarians from all across Europe, sometimes there's a little bit of reluctance or kind of doubt from librarians that maybe they don't always have the skills or the training or the experience necessary to do advocacy and lobbying. But what we've learned, I think, and I think this is true for most of you, is that being a librarian is not just a 9-to-5 job. I think it's almost a calling, it's a vocation, it's something that you guys really believe in and you really have a passion about. And actually, I think that's one of the most important qualities in an advocate, is to have a true belief and a passion about what you do. Eric mentioned earlier our MEP Library Lovers Group, something we're very, very proud of. We launched it a couple of years ago. We have not quite 100, I think we're on 98, which is a real shame. But our goal is to get 100 MEPs out of 750. And the idea was to bring together any MEPs that we'd already worked with who had expressed some kind of interest in libraries for whatever reason, bring them into this informal grouping so that we could have a platform to share things with them. We've done a whole bunch of projects. One that we did recently was called 60 Books for the Summer, where we asked our MEP library lovers for their book recommendations, and we put together this the list of 60 books, recommendations from all over Europe. So I would challenge you to go and have a look on our website or on our Twitter and see how many of those books you've read, because it's a bit of an eclectic mix. So, but what's been super important for us in the MEP Library Lovers Group has been getting MEPs into libraries in their country, because an MEP who spends 1 hour in a library in their country visiting and seeing what's happening there is worth 50 hours of us going and telling them in their Brussels office how great libraries are. It's been incredibly important. And the Netherlands is actually very well represented in the MEP Library Lovers Group. I think we have about 10 MEPs. And I want to show you a short video from Utrecht Library. Do we have anyone from Utrecht Library? Yes. From when MEP Esther de Lange went to visit. And we worked with you guys before to do a bit of communications and a little bit of social media. And you put together this fantastic short 1-minute video of MEP Esther de Lange talking about libraries in a library. So can I'm not sure how to do it. Yeah.
I'm a member of the Library Lovers Group in the European Parliament, together with quite a lot of colleagues from various member states of the European Union, because we all believe that libraries have a very important role to play in society. Libraries are not just about books, they are about a lot more. There's much more to be had from your local library, whether it's about learning new skills, programming, meeting people. In a way, libraries have become society in itself, in small, with a broad variety of functions.
So I think that was a really fantastic piece of advocacy that I wanted to share with you. Let's move on to number 3. Like I said, a lot of what we do is about giving librarians the tools to advocate for themselves and kind of debunking advocacy and making it as easy as possible. But at the same time, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, because we know that there are a whole bunch of specific library advocacy resources out there, from the Gates Foundation. There's a lot from the States as well. But I just want to talk to you about a few of the tools that we've created ourselves. These are our libraries and skills fact sheets. So we've done one for every EU member state. This is the one for the Netherlands. I did print some off and then I left them in the printer in Brussels, but you're very, very welcome to go onto our website and download them and use them. And I think what works really well in these fact sheets is having the library data at the top, so from the VOB, so thank you guys for that, and then contrasting it and putting it with this EU data on digital skills. So you're telling a story when you put the data about libraries and about skills all in one, and that's worked really well. I couldn't come here and not talk about our Libraries Change Lives tour that Eric mentioned earlier. I'm really disappointed that was before I joined the project and I wasn't able to be a part of it. But so we took 15 MEPs into libraries in their countries, again, getting MEPs, policymakers in their libraries. And if you just Google Libraries Change Lives, you'll see our online publication. We did a whole bunch of short videos, testimonials from MEPs, but also from library users, librarians, and we found that's also quite powerful. We've used that in meetings with policymakers as well, just to show a short video and to tell a story, really. I was really pleased that Eric started talking about hashtags, because one of the other things, the other tools that we use for advocacy is social media, and specifically Twitter. We basically started completely from scratch. I didn't really know much about Twitter, but we found it to be a really powerful tool, not only for influencing MEPs who tend to be quite active on Twitter, and also when we're at conferences and events in Brussels, we find that literally half the conversation is happening there, so we really need to make sure we have a voice amongst all of the other people who are talking. But I think also Twitter and Facebook, really useful to see what librarians are talking about in Europe and globally, and to be able to share things across borders. And I'm thinking specifically of the UK, who have been having a really difficult time with all the library closures. I think Twitter gives them a platform that has a lot more freedom and creativity than they might have in their professional lives or maybe on their library websites. So for us, Twitter is a really important tool. The fourth thing we've learned about library advocacy is that we never advocate alone. What do I mean by that? I mean two things. Firstly, I think library advocacy can't just be about librarians saying how great libraries are. It needs to be about bringing the community who we serve along with us, bringing users along with us, bringing partners, policymakers, and I think policymakers can be some of our ambassadors and the most powerful ambassadors as well. This is an example from the UK, from Manchester. This was Neil McInnes, who we work very closely with, from Manchester Public Library. He developed this relationship with his local councillor, and so I think it's every month his local councillor, his policymaker, sends out a newsletter to all the constituents what's been happening in our libraries, which is just absolutely fantastic, I think. But when I say we never advocate alone, I also mean we work cross-border. We work in, not only in Europe, but also having a global vision and having this feeling of global librarianship. This is our advocacy lab, so we don't have an executive committee as such, but every 6 months or so we bring together a group of some of the best librarians across Europe. There's a few Dutch librarians in there. I'll leave you to spot them. But I think it's incredibly valuable for them to be able to share their experiences, successes, also failures, I think is really valuable to share, because it can be quite isolating when you feel like you're maybe all alone in your country or in your constituency, to be able to see what's happening in the rest of Europe. So not advocating alone is important, I think, for the individuals, but also for the sector as a whole. Number 5, our final point, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this. We can make the policy agenda work for us. And I think if we're thinking about global librarianship and a global vision that IFLA has been working on, we also need to think about global messaging. When I first started with this project, there was this traditional perception from policymakers actually of putting libraries into cultural policy. So Ministry of Culture, that's where you belong, that's very nice, that's libraries. But we know, and of course we know that you know, that libraries have so much more to offer than that. And it's been a bit of a challenge for us as well to frame our message in a positive way. So not saying, libraries are struggling, we need help, but going to the policymakers, identifying their priorities, and then talking about the ways in which libraries and librarians can contribute to those priorities and to those policy goals. So the effectiveness of our advocacy approach has really been about leading with the issues, and some of the issues that are relevant both for libraries and for policymakers. And I loved Rolf's slide with the question, to what problems in society is library the answer? Because that's really been a huge part of our advocacy approach. I'm just going to quickly take you through this table because we've recently put this together when we've been thinking about the future and about what are those issues that bring together library values with the EU agenda themes that are coming up and current issues. Actually, I'm going to start at the bottom because I want to finish at the top. Library values, openness, I think that goes without saying. The EU agenda theme of social inclusion. It's only really recently, I think, in the past few years that the EU has been thinking about social inclusion as a theme. And I think what really put that on the table has been the migrant crisis and thinking about how the EU can really have some long-term effects there. And I know that libraries in the Netherlands, but I'm also thinking very much about countries like Germany and Cologne, have really been leading on the response to the migrant crisis and have succeeded in opening up some pockets of funding that way. And we know that the unique selling point of libraries is their ability to reach socially excluded groups. So not just migrants, but the unemployed, the elderly, all those people who are maybe not captured by other things. So we really see social inclusion as an opportunity to develop a narrative about the potential of libraries in delivering on EU goals. Moving up one, citizen engagement and democratic empowerment. I think Doc 1 and Rolf really just epitomise the potential of libraries when it comes to democratic empowerment, bringing the citizen services into the library. And I think that's especially interesting at this time of maybe disillusionment and mistrust across all of Europe with traditional systems, traditional politics, rise of populism, dare I say Brexit. So, and fake news and media literacy, these are real buzzwords we're hearing in Brussels, and there's a clear crossover with the work that libraries do. So again, we see this as a real opportunity to develop a narrative around how libraries can contribute to citizen empowerment. And then finally, I wanted to finish with this one, digital skills. I think you guys probably know better than most how technology is changing the world and disrupting traditional ways of doing things, and also the risk of a digital skills gap. And we see in Brussels that the EU is really positioning itself as a front runner in all matters digital, so wanting to create a digital single market. But I'm also thinking about things that I don't understand, like blockchain and artificial intelligence, GDPR. It's really globally positioning itself as a leader on digital. And so they're really starting to realise that there's a gap and a need for digital skills development, both ICT skills, but really basic digital skills. And that's where we've had the most success so far, has been talking about libraries and digital skills. 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I can do it. So this has inspired one of our most successful events, which was called Generation Code Born at the Library. So that was held in the European Parliament in Brussels 2 years in a row now during EU Code Week, so really making the link there with digital skills. And we brought in exhibits from public libraries from all across Europe. We had some really cool stuff from Frisk Lab in the Netherlands. I don't know if Jeroen or anyone is here. Also, we had Robot Norma last year, so really showing the MEPs on their doorstep what was happening in public libraries, and most importantly, having librarians from every member state come in, meet their members of European Parliament and talk to them about what's happening. We were also really honoured to have Gerald there at both of them, speaking for IFLA. And we had, over the 2 years, 200 MEPs join, so fantastically successful for us. So like I said, that's been a hook for political advocacy, but also looking forward, we think that there's some scope for creating some funding opportunities there. The current budget framework was agreed 7 years ago. So as you can imagine, when it comes to digital, a lot has changed since then. But that's all changing. And I'm going to very quickly, I promise, talk about what's happening next and why now is the time to act. Next year is a big year for the EU, 2019. Just to take you through very briefly, last week, 2 weeks ago, the European Commission published its MFF proposal. The MFF is another EU acronym. It's the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. Sounds complicated, but it's essentially just the EU making a decision about how it'll spend its money for the next budget cycle, which tends to be around 7 years. So very technical, as you can imagine, a lot of budget lines, but also incredibly political. It's about EU decision makers, and there are a lot of them, figuring out what kind of Europe they want to portray by spending money. It's a horribly long negotiation process, which has just started with the Commission. It will go through the Parliament and then through the Member States, but it has to be approved by 2020. I'm going to skip through Brexit because I don't like talking about it, but just to say it's very important for the budget because the EU is losing a net contributor. So that's a big deal, and the Commission has actually proposed a bigger budget for a smaller EU, and I know that your Prime Minister is not very happy about that. So just to show that it's very political and the negotiations are not over yet. And then we have the European Parliament elections in May next year. There's usually a huge turnover. I think at least a third of MEPs leave. And of course, we're losing all the British MEPs. And it's incredibly rare that these two things, the budget and the elections, happen in the same year. That's not meant to be. They have different timelines and different cycles. So it's a particularly frantic year of change next year. We'll also have some new European commissioners. So everything is to play for next year. The EU has changed a lot since the last budget framework, since the last Parliament. I think the last budget was about strong and sustainable growth, whereas the Commission is calling this budget protect, empower, defend. So you can already see the narrative shifting a little bit. But over the next 12 months, policymakers are really going to be thinking about their priorities and their budgets, and there's real scope for, instead of fitting into the existing framework, really shaping the next one. So just to sum up, 5 things we have learned about library advocacy in Europe. It's all about relationships. You guys make excellent ambassadors. We already have a lot of tools at our fingertips. We never advocate alone. We work with cross-sector and cross-border. And we can make the policy agenda work for us. And I think the message I want to leave you guys with is that we have a golden opportunity really next year. And I think as a sector, we're in an excellent position to really have some influence at the EU level and in Brussels over the next 12 to 18 months. At PL 2020, we'll be continuing with our political advocacy, doing some campaigning around the elections, but also trying to get those pockets of money and some funding for libraries. And then we're really looking forward to working with the sector, working with IFLA and IBLIDA to make sure that also libraries are ready to take advantage of those opportunities. And I'm done.
Yes, good.